Okay, find all zeros. What do you notice about this particular one? It's a degree of 2, which means I have a couple options. I can factor, or I can use what? Quadratic formula. So my first thinking would be to try factoring. That would be a 7 on top and a -4 on the bottom. Is there anything that would multiply to get 7 and add to get 4? No. So factoring is no longer an option because it doesn't work. Therefore, I'm left with quadratic formula. Quadratic formula, -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So in this particular one, what is a? 1. What is b? And what is c? Okay, so -4 plus or minus the square root of -4 squared minus 4ac all over 2a. What happens to -4? Becomes a +4. -4 squared, that, -4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 7 is -12. All over 2 times 1 is 2. Now, as soon as I notice that something's going to reduce, like the 4 and the 2, then what I need to do is I need to split it up. So I'm going to split it up into 4 over 2 plus or minus radical -12 over 2 so that I can simplify each of those separately. What does 4 over 2 become? 2. And then square root of -12. I'm going to leave the 2 on the bottom. But -12 means there's going to be an I, correct? And then if I draw a tree for 12, 6 and 2, 3 and 2, I have a pair of 2's, which means I can take out a 2 with the I, and there's a 3 left inside. So what can reduce there? The 2's, so what am I left with? 2 plus or minus I radical 3. Quick little notice. Whenever you have a radical in the problem, it has to absolutely be the last thing you write. If you wrote your answer like this, it gets a little tricky to decide whether the I is a part of the radical or not, which is why the radical always has to be the last thing. Because some people, in fact, I was grading group tests, and one person, they drew their radical sign like that. That's a huge problem because there's some things that are not supposed to be under radicals. Your little line right here shows what's supposed to be under and what's not. So all that to say, if you have something not in the radical, make sure you put it in front so there's no confusion about whether it's a part of the radical or not. Okay? And I should never be part of the radical, FYI. Should always be out. Questions about number 1? Beautiful. Number 2, state all the possible rational zeros. Okay, I'm going to do that first. Factors of my constant. What's my constant in this problem? 5. So I have 1 and 5. My leading coefficient? What's my leading coefficient in this problem? 6. So that would be 1, 2, 3, and 6. Yeah? So now I'm going to take all these. 1 over 1. 5 over 1. 1 over 2. 5 over 2. Nothing's reducing so far. 1 over 3. 5 over 3. 1 over 6. 5 over 6. There actually is nothing that reduces on that one. They all are part of it. Okay? So. Now, I have a long list of possible zeros, but what did I say to do if you have a long list of possible zeros? Start at 1 and -1 and go from there, because we have set it up so that you will find a 0 pretty quick. And what's nice is with this only being a third degree, I only need to find one zero before I can use quadratic formula or factoring. So if I use, starting at the beginning of the list, if I use 1, what are my coefficients here? 6, -7, -8, and 5. Keep in mind you have to use a placeholder if there's a missing value in there. In this case, there isn't. Bring down the 6. 6 times 1 is 6. -7 plus 6 is -1. 1 times -1 is -1. That gives me -9. 1 times -9 is -9. I do not get 0 as my remainder, do I? So 1 does not work. What should I try next? -1. 6, -7, -8, and 5. Bring down the 6. 6 times -1 is -6. That's -13. +13. +5. -5. 0. There's my first answer, which is -1. I like to go ahead and while I'm writing the zeros, I go ahead and write the factored form. If -1 is a 0, what did the parentheses look like? X plus 1. Okay, how many more zeros do I need to have? 2 more. So I'm now at 6x squared minus 13x plus 5. I'm going to try factoring first because I think factoring is quicker, usually. 6 times 5 is 30 and -13. What would my two numbers be? -10 and -3, and 6x and 6x. What is 6x over -10 reduced to? 3x over -5, and 6x over -3 reduces to 2x over -1. So 3x minus 5 and 2x minus 1. Those are my other two parentheses. 3x minus 5 and 2x minus 1. Yes?
At x squared, does it matter if you do quadratic formula or factor?
Nope. You could totally do quadratic formula as well.
Even if it's factorable?
Even if it's factorable. What will happen is if it's factorable, your radical will end up turning into a nice number. And so you'll actually be able to add the two top numbers in this step. Okay? In fact, if I have time, I might show you this in quadratic formula also, just to make sure we've got that covered. So I have my 3 parentheses. I just need to get my other zeros. 3x minus 5 equals 0. Add 5. 3x equals 5. Divide by 3, and x equals 5/3. And over here, 2x minus 1 equals 0. Adding 1, 2x equals 1. Divide by 2, and x equals 1/2. There's my 3 zeros. Really quickly, if I used quadratic formula here, let me show you what it would look like. -13 plus or minus the square root of -13 squared minus 4 times 6 times 5, running out of room there, all over 2 times 6. So that gives me positive 13 plus or minus the square root of what? Let me just verify. -13 squared minus 4 times 6 times 5, 49. 2 times 6 is 12. So what that gives me is 13 plus or minus 7 over 12. And I'll get my two answers by doing 13 plus 7 over 12 and 13 minus 7 over 12. What is 13 plus 7? 20. And 20 over 12 reduces to what? 5 over 3. And 13 minus 7 is 6 over 12, which reduces to the 1/2. So you can totally use quadratic formula there. Your radical just ends up disappearing if it was something that could have been factored also. Okay? All right, number 3, find all zeros. Divide first with the 1 0 that has been given. So here's the one that's given to me. Notice it's already on my list of zeros. So -1/3 is my box number. Am I missing any terms that I need to fill in a placeholder for? 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Nope. So 6, negative 13, 7, 1, negative 1. Yeah? Bring down my 6. If you want to be using your, where is my calculator? The one with the fraction button, because some people might not be as confident with their fractions. Then you're going to do 6 times negative 1, fraction button 3, and I get negative 2. Negative 13 and negative 2 is negative 15. So now negative 15 times negative 1, fraction button 3, 5. 7 and 5 are 12. 12 times negative 1, fraction 3 is negative 4. 1 minus 4 is negative 3. And negative 3 times negative 1/3 is 1. There's my 0. What happens if I don't get a 0 on that step? What's the problem? You messed up somewhere, right? Because it tells me that's a 0, which means they're telling me that's a 0. So if I don't get a 0, I did something wrong here. So I need to go back and look at that. All right, so now I had an x to the 4th, so now I'm down to x to the 3rd. So 6x to the 3rd minus 15x squared plus 12x minus 3. I could try factoring if I wanted to. What kind of factoring would that be? Grouping, right? If I don't want to try factoring, just because we've done factoring a lot of times, I'm going to keep going with the other process. I would personally divide everything by 3 to get my numbers smaller. And 6 over 3 is 2x cubed minus 5x squared plus 4x minus 1 equals 0. Can I use factoring? I don't know that I can. Now that it's reduced, I don't know that they would have anything in common. Okay, so what do I usually say to do? Start working through the list. We all know that positive 1 and negative 1 seem to be on every single list, don't they? So I'm going to start with positive 1. 2, negative 5, 4, and negative 1. I haven't made my list of possibilities. You notice that? Because we're just going to see where this goes. 1 times negative 3 is negative 3. 4 minus 3 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. There's my 0. So what did I just find out works? 1 works. When I'm talking about factored form for this problem, that's going to be x minus 1, right? But there's something I can't forget to put in my factored form. What's that? The negative 1/3 that they gave me. So make sure that guy's in there somewhere. That would look like what? 3x plus 1. Okay. So let's see. 1 worked. I'm down to 2x to the what? Let's see. That was x to the 3rd. So now I'm down to x squared. Minus 3x plus 1. Can I factor that? 2 and negative 3. That would be negative 2 and negative 1. So this becomes x over negative 1. And this stays 2x minus 1. So x minus 1 and 2x minus 1. What do you notice about the x minus 1? It's already there. So what does that mean? I have to put a squared there because the parentheses is twice. It worked there and here. And up here I have to note that it has a multiplicity of 2. Okay? And then the 2x minus 1, set that equal to 0. 2x equals 1. Divide by 2 and x equals what? 1/2. And that parentheses was 2x minus 1. So double check at the end. If it's a 4th degree, you should have 4 zeros. You should have a 4th degree here in factored form also. Okay? Those of you whose tests I graded, did I take off a point if you had x minus 1, x minus 1? Instead of x minus 1 squared? I did take off a point if you don't have it squared there. Okay? We want to see that that's a double root or a multiplicity of 2. Also, this comes up occasionally, usually about 1 or 2 people in every class do that. Are there any commas between my parentheses? No. Commas only go between different values. Your parentheses can't have any commas because they're all being multiplied. And multiplication just has nothing between them. So make sure you're not putting commas between your parentheses. Any questions about number 3? Awesome. Oop, upside down. Number 4, state the possible rational zeros, then find all zeros and state it in factored form. This one, we've provided a graph. Now, I got a little confused here when I first looked at this because of why. I can't come up with my list of possible zeros if there's no constant. Notice there's no constant. How do I get a constant? I have to factor out an x. So that gives me x times 4x to the third plus 6x to the second minus 2. Is that enough? What was your answer?
I said, can you take out a 2x?
I can take out a 2 also, can't I? So I need to take out a 2. That makes this a 2, this a 3, and this a 1. So in my factored form, I've got 2x out in front. You can put it in parentheses or not in parentheses, doesn't matter. But I've got a 2x taken out. Okay? What is the 0 that I get from there? If I set 2x equal to 0, and I divide by 2, what's 0 divided by 2? So the first 0 is 0, or the first root is 0. And if I look at my graph, not the color I wanted, if I look at my graph, can I see where it's crossing at 0? I think it's crossing right there. That is that root. I did have some people that got like -2 as one of their answers. And my thinking is, when I look over here at -2, is it crossing the x-axis there? No, it should match up with the picture. So make sure you're not just, forgetting to check those things. Those are helpful ways to check your answers. Okay, so I've dealt with the 2x. So really this is what I'm dealing with now, right? 2x cubed plus 3x squared minus 1. Possible zeros. My constant is 1. My leading coefficient is 2. 1 over 1 is 1. 1 over 2 is... There were some people that also put 2 as an option. There's no 2 as a numerator. Okay, it's almost like they flipped it or something, or they did this, where 2 isn't even a possibility there. Okay, so be careful with that one. So my list of possibilities is really short. And if I look down here, this looks pretty clear to me that -1 should work out for me, right? So I'm going to make -1 my box number. What are my numbers across? 2, 3, 0, and -1. There's one of those placeholder problems, right? So I'm bringing down the 2. 2 times -1 is -2. 3 and -2 is 1. That gives me -1, -1, +1, 0. I found an answer. It is -1. What does that look like in parentheses? X plus 1. So I'm down to 2x squared plus 1x minus 1. I'm down to a second degree equation, which means I can factor or quadratic formula. However, I'm not going to do either of those in this case because what do you notice about that 0? It bounces, which means it has a multiplicity of 2, right? Which means that I should be able to do -1 as my box number again and take the second degree and bring it down to a first degree. So let's check that. 2, 1, -1. 2 times -1 is -2. 1 minus 2 is -1. That gives me +1, and that gives me 0. So I had a second degree. Now I'm down to just a first degree, which is 2x minus 1. So how do I note that here, that -1 was a multiplicity of 2? I write multiplicity of 2 on this line. And up here, I need to write a squared. And then what's my last parentheses? 2x minus 1, because I got it down to a degree 1. And if I set 2x minus 1 equal to 0, 2x equals 1, divide by 2, x equals 1/2. So I'm going to check. I had 4 as my degree. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Everything matches up. Okay, so. All right, last one, find all the zeros using any method we learned in class. Okay, what method would you choose here?
Factoring.
Why? Why factoring?
Because it's a 4 and you divide it into 2.
Because we have that pattern going on, right? So I'm going to go ahead and snowflake. What goes on the top? On the bottom? Okay. Now some people were confused. What do I do with that? Well, the x to the fourth gets split up, x squared and x squared. And what are my two numbers that'll multiply to get negative 36 and add to get 7? I'm sorry, add to get 5. 9 and negative 4. So that means I have x squared plus 9 and x squared minus 4. Now, if I asked you to factor this one completely, is that factored completely? No. Factored completely would be x squared plus 9 and then x plus 2, x minus 2, right? What two answers do I get from here?
X minus 2.
Positive and negative 2, right? This one gives me negative 2, that one gives me positive 2. Yeah? Keep in mind when you're typing this on the computer, there is a button that looks like that. So you can just put plus minus 2. Okay, so let's see this other one. X squared plus 9, if I set that equal to 0, I would subtract 9. X squared is equal to negative 9. Square rooting both sides. X equals what? Plus and minus. What's the square root of negative 9? 3i. So positive and negative 2, positive and negative 3i. How many roots is that? 1, 2, 3, 4. And that matches up with the degree. Any questions on that one? All right. The last two are the multiplying ones. These are the ones where I may or may not give you all the zeros. I did correct this one. This one is a 4/3 because our copier wasn't liking that. What root am I not giving you here? Giving you but not giving you? Positive radical 3, because we know those radicals always have to come in pairs. The other thing I notice is I have a 0 of 0. What does that mean? That means I have an x out in front. What if that 0 had a multiplicity of 2? That would mean I have x squared out in front. If that 0 had a multiplicity of 3, that means I have x cubed out in front. Okay, but the 0 just means I have an x out in front. The reason is because it doesn't make any sense to multiply this, because x minus 0 is just x. It's a whole lot easier to just write it as your parentheses there. 4/3, what does that look like in parentheses? 3x minus 4, right? If it's a positive 4/3, it's going to be a minus in the parentheses. And then my radical 3's, one would be x plus radical 3, the other one would be x minus radical 3. Yes? Now, I'm going to multiply 2 and 2, and then multiply their answers. What is x times 3x? 3x squared. And x times negative 4? That's easy. I'm going to take that and multiply it to the answer of this. Over here, x times x is x times negative radical 3 is negative x radical 3. Positive radical 3 times x is positive x radical 3. And positive radical 3 times negative radical 3 is negative radical 9. So let's see, I get x squared, those two cancel, minus, what is radical 9? 3. So I'm going to multiply 3x squared minus 4x by x squared minus 3, put my answer in standard form, and I'm good to go. 3x squared times x squared is 3x to the 4th. 3x squared times negative 3, negative 9x squared. 4x times x squared, sorry, negative 4x times x squared, negative 4x cubed, and negative 4x times negative 3, positive 12x. So putting that all in standard form, again, there's supposed to be a line here. 3x to the 4th minus what? 4x cubed minus 9x squared plus 12x. That's what my answer should look like. Any questions there? Few important things there. There's a fraction that you got to know how to put in parentheses. There's a x or a root of 0 that you need to know what to do with, meaning putting the x out in front. And there's a radical you need to know that the opposite one is also there. Okay? Number 7, what value am I not giving you? Negative 5i. Also, because of this, what does that mean? There's going to be 2 parentheses that match. So if one is one of my roots, that looks like x minus 1. Here, do I want to put the squared? Not necessarily. It's going to be easier to see what I'm multiplying if I multiply them both out. Okay? And then I have x minus 5i and x plus 5i. So far, so good? Again, I'm going to take 2 at a time and 2 at a time, and then I'll multiply the answers. X times x is x squared. X times negative 1, negative x. Negative 1 times x, negative x. And negative 1 times negative 1, positive 1. That simplifies to x squared minus 2x plus 1. And over here, x times x is x squared. X times 5i, 5ix or xi, doesn't matter. Negative 5i times x, negative 5xi or ix. And negative 5i times positive 5i would be negative 25i squared. Those 2 middle terms cancel. I have x squared, and what do I do with the I squared? It's negative 1. So I really have negative 25 times negative 1, which is what? Plus 25. Multiply these guys, put it in standard form, and I'm done. X squared times x squared is x to the 4th. X squared times 25, 25x squared. Negative 2x times x squared, negative 2x to the 3rd. Negative 2x times 25 would be negative 50x. 1 times x squared, and 1 times 25 is 25. So let's see. X to the 4th comes first, then I have minus 2x to the 3rd. I have 2 terms with x squared. What does that give me? 26x squared and minus 50x and plus 25. Okay. Any questions there? I've said it before and I'll say it again just because it's really important. Multiply your i's together first and your radicals together. Don't ever try and multiply a radical parentheses against something else that doesn't have a radical. Or don't multiply an I parentheses with something else that doesn't have an I, because it's just going to get the i's all confused and you're going to get lost real quick. Okay? Multiply them first to get rid of those i's and those radicals, and then life gets simpler. Okay? All right. Happy studying.